The fighter is one of the base vocations you can choose to play as in Dragon's Dogma 2. It's also one of the most powerful and effective, serving in both melee and defensive positions. It's a perfect starter vocation to get introduced to many of the game's mechanics, and it's also a great vocation to use in general if you're a big fan of melee but maybe don't care as much about magic or those sorts of added things. Now, I do think that the advanced and combination vocations are a little more fun to play through just because you can do a lot with them and they combine a lot of great elements from the base and starter vocations, but still, the fighter vocation can be a great way to get used to the game and earn some credits to unlock better skills in other vocations. There's also a lot of really neat armors and weapons that you can use with the fighter vocation, so if you're someone that values a bit of the aesthetic flair of things, you might find that the fighter fits your fancy. There's nothing extra that you need to do in order to unlock the fighter vocation. When you first start up the game in the character creator, if you choose to create your own character, you have the option of selecting which starter vocation you want. This is just when you pick from a short list that includes the fighter vocation. Of course, in the game, you can change your vocation whenever you want and can pick any vocation you want and master as little or as many as you'd like. You can choose to stick with the fighter vocation for the entire length of the game too if you really want. The fighter has many skills that you can choose from, but at any time you can only equip 4. When you head to a vocation guild, you can purchase these skills for points. There are great ones that can definitely elevate your fighter build and take it to the next level. The skills the fighter can use are definitely made though for more aggressive combat, but there are still ones that provide some defensive level skills and even some shield-based skills. I tried out a lot of the skills that the fighter can use and found that there were some really good ones, some I didn't really enjoy, and some that were okay enough to use. Still, I experimented until I found a combination that I felt worked the best to provide everything from defensive to aggressive offensive. Firstly, this skill is perfect for closing in gaps on enemies and can be super lethal when effectively used. It's called the Blink Strike or Burst Strike depending on how advanced you are in the fighter vocation. This is a perfect offensive move that lets you get in close with the enemy and draw them towards you basically instead. Additionally, it's great to stun enemies enough to give you a window to hit them with the impale, which could either kill them or at least dramatically destroy their health. Also, it does provide a really neat finisher. The next skill is the Shield Pummel. This one is pretty good because it puts your shield front and center as more than just a defensive tool, but it's also a pretty powerful attack tool. Using Shield Pummel, you strike the enemy by hitting with your shield and not your sword. This can be powerful enough to send enemies flying and can dramatically knock their health down. This is one that I personally used a lot during my time playing the fighter. Its only downside though is that it really doesn't have as much of an effect on bigger enemies, but they will still take some damage, so it's effective enough. Now, you can swap Shield Pummel with another shield-based skill, which is called Impeccable Guard or Flawless Guard. Considering that the fighter is equipped for advancing and attacking on the front lines face-to-face with enemies, the Impeccable Guard is great for breaking your stagger and positioning yourself back into the fight. Basically what it does is you use your shield and you kind of spin around and hit a bunch of the enemies to get them out of your way, which gives you enough time to reorient yourself into the fight. So I actually really like this one a lot, and it's really effective against larger enemies and pushing them away at least. It doesn't necessarily just pummel one individual enemy, rather you might hit at like maybe 3 enemies. So it's actually a good one, and I do recommend this one a little more than Shield Pummel because of that. The third skill I found that was good is Airward Slash or the Cloudward Slash, again depending on which stage you're at in the fighter vocation. The reason being is that in some areas of the game you'll often find yourself face to face with like harpies and other flying beasts in general. The Cloudward Slash lets you get a bit of a high jump with a slashing motion of the sword. This is perfect for dealing damage, knocking down flying enemies, and I even found that it was good for bigger boss-like enemies that had higher statures because you couldn't hit them at higher angles when you're on the ground obviously, but with this one you can jump and kind of slash at them while you're mid-air, which is really effective as well. Finally, the fourth skill I found to be great was the Gouging Skewer. This one is awesome for bigger enemies because it's just awesome in general. You can knock the enemies off balance with Deflect and then get them on the ground, and then you can impale them. So it's good for when you're on a larger enemy as well and you're climbing up, because this is one of the only skills that you can really use on a larger enemy. You skewer them where you are and then you can hit like follow-up attacks. So you just keep pressing like X or Y or whatever, controller you happen to be using. You just keep pressing for a follow-up attack and it'll just continue to deal damage while you're on the enemy, which is absolutely perfect for bigger bosses like the ogres and the cyclops and things like that. But this one is also great for, your smaller goblins and whatever enemies you're dealing with. So it's not just good for large ones, it's good for all of them. So that's why I really recommend that you use Gouging Skewer and use it a lot. There are a lot of skills that you can pick, but the ones I listed were the ones I felt personally to be the most useful for any playthrough of this game. But feel free to play around as you need though and adjust this to your preferences in combat. These are just the 4 that I thought were the absolute best for all-rounded combat and defense. Next up are the core skills. These are passive skills, meaning that they don't necessarily need any special buttons to use and apply to your combat situations. The fighter's core skills are very effective and helpful, so get as many of these as you can and don't hesitate on them. The first up is Onslaught, which is a basic 3-hit combo attack that you can use to stagger enemies. It's great to follow up with an Impale and can be very effective in setting up your enemies for a staggering attack. Impale is another skill that's very useful, and it's more of a heavy attack than Onslaught. This one's great to hit at for off balance and knock down enemies. It can also be used to finish off smaller targets if they're downed. For larger enemies, it can be effective on weak spots for extra damage. So sometimes when you're fighting a boss, the enemy's going to lay down because they're downed. That's when you want to hit the Impale because it's going to deal a lot of damage. Defend is the basic block tool for the fighter, but it's great for getting your enemies to stagger and get knocked down. Blocking with the shield is a vital aspect of this vocation because you will find yourself often facing some battles with a lot of enemies coming at you. So using the shield will get you an advantage against them. Deflect, or true deflect, is achieved by blocking just as the enemy is about to hit you, which will send the enemy staggering back, knocking them off balance. This is a great thing to master as a skill for the fighter vocation because it can position you in a much better way compared to your enemies and lets you get an advantage over them for sure. Because when they're staggered, you can actually deal finishing moves, so that's extremely useful to know how to do. Next up is the Tusk Toss, which is a knockdown move that launches enemies into the air and then follows up with the Impale. This one's also great just from how effective it is at getting you an advantage over your enemies. Steeled Foundation is a neat one that can help your Arisen brace against fall damage. This one basically lets you use the shield to break your fall if you're knocked off a cliffside or have somehow found yourself falling. It doesn't completely eliminate damage, but it definitely minimizes its impact. Finally, Enchanted Counter is a skill that adds elemental damage from your weapon that is either emitted passively or some other way. It also works with your blocking and countering as well. Next up are Augments. Augments are another important thing to consider when creating the ultimate fighter build in Dragon's Dogma 2. Augments are interesting in Dragon's Dogma 2 because they're not locked to certain vocations like your skills and your core skills. Augments are useful across vocations. Of course, you need to be sure the augments you're applying are actually helpful because, for example, some of the sorcerer augments aren't really good for, say, the fighter, but maybe they're good for Mystic Spearhand. Now, you can use the augments from the vocation you're using by itself, but I don't recommend that. I always recommend you try to play through the other vocations and get their augments too, because that's the trick to making a successful build in this game augment-wise. There are a few augments I recommend you add for the fighter. Some of these are in general great for all vocations, but the ones I'm talking about specifically are number 1, Vigor, which comes from the Thief. This one reduces stamina when you're on top of enemies, so oftentimes when you climb up an enemy, you're gonna expend that stamina bar. This one reduces how much stamina is expended, giving you more time to get more hits on your enemies. Avidity is from the Archer vocation and lets you climb cliffs faster, which is great when you're facing some goblins that invade from above. Dominance is from the Warrior vocation, and this one improves knockdown power. Exaltation is from the Mage, and this one improves stamina recovery speed, which is vital for an aggressive vocation like the Fighter. There's also Endurance and Lethality from the Archer vocation as well, and these improve max stamina and dealt damage respectively. You can play around with any combination of augments, but these are definitely the ones you want to go for at more advanced stages. If you're still a beginner, the Fighter augments are perfect, don't worry about it. Lenar is the Maistre of the Fighter vocation, and you probably met him very early on in the game, around when you get to Melve for the first time. The Riotous Fury is the skill you get from Lenar, and you take on the quest Redevant of Calamity. This quest will let you help Melve survive a dragon's attack. You don't actually need to finish this quest though, you can just go to Lenar and give him a gift every day for a few days and he'll eventually give you the skill. Make sure you're playing as a fighter, as I found that increases the chances for him giving it to you faster. Building a party that supports you as the fighter is essential, because the pawns you hire can make all the difference in how you play in combat. I always recommend having a mage with you unless you're a mage, because the healing powers that the mage gives out are extremely vital for a combat class like the fighter, where you're just in head-on combat constantly. Furthermore, the Thief or Archer is great to have because both of these are fast, but they have different ways of dealing damage. I find the Archer is very beneficial because the Archer can take out long distance and high ground targets, which lets you focus on the ground. The Thief is fast and can take out targets quickly, as well as damage down targets to let you focus on the standing targets. The Sorcerer is also very helpful to have, as the Sorcerer can deal a ton of damage with awesome spells from a distance and support you while you're fighting against a ton of enemies. I ran with a Mage, Thief, and Archer, archer and actually found that it was a good build, but you could swap the thief or archer with a sorcerer. You can pretty much play around with this however you want. I also tried at one point to have me as the fighter, one of my pawns as a warrior, one as a mage, and my main pawn would be the archer, and that was also a pretty good build because the fighter and warrior are both kind of heavier classes, but they almost complement each other. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's totally up to you how you build your party. I just always recommend that you have a mage because you need health and you need healing, and I typically recommend you have at least one of the party members be a long distance attacker, so either sorcerer or archer, because both of those deal long distance damage, and that does help you when you're being surrounded by a bunch of hobgoblins at the end of the day. Unlike some of the other vocations in Dragon's Dogma 2, I find that the fighter needs good armor and good weapons, and you should be getting them as soon as possible. I recommend that you save up your money early in the game and just enchant your armor until you can get a really worth it set of armor, because they can get really expensive really quickly. Some of the best armors you can find in the game are closer to Batal, I found, including at the checkpoint town and in Batal itself. Here's where you'll find some of the best looking armors early in the game, as well as some of the most powerful ones like this eagle helmet I'm wearing in this video. If you want to get to the checkpoint town early, now you might not be able to get to Batal early in the game because you do need like an entry permit, but getting to the checkpoint town is really easy. You just have to take the ox cart where I'm showing you on the map right now. It's going to go to the checkpoint rest town. You can go to the armory shop there or whatever and just buy whatever armors you want and then head back to Vermund. Once you get to Batal, you're going to head to Bok Batal. That's where you're going to find the armor that has some of the best armors in Batal. There's also the volcanic island. Really, there's a lot of places where you can get good armors, but if you want good armors and weapons early in the game, it's going to be the checkpoint rest town and then Batal. For the most part, buying armor and weapons, you're going to have to look for if they have good defensive and health boosting stats. There are, for example, like the rings, which you should keep on you because they're very useful. Some of these rings will increase your health or will increase your stamina or will let you carry more stuff. So play around with these as you want. Still, you do need to make some good amount of money, like I said, early on in the game to find some of the best armors and fast, because like I said, the armors can get very expensive. Weapon-wise, kind of the same thing applies, though I recommend you pick up a better weapon early on. Like, don't just wait till you get to the checkpoint rest town. Unless you want to, you can. The broadsword in Vermund is good if you're just starting out and you don't really want to venture beyond Vermund too much just yet. But if you do make it to the checkpoint rest town, there's a ton of cool weapons there that you can get. Once you're in Batal, there's also a ton of cool weapons. So really, I recommend the checkpoint rest town early game, but Vermund is also, you know, it has some pretty good stuff too. And with that being said, thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed that video, feel free to leave a like and subscribe with notifications set to all so you never miss out on a single upload. Comment below what you think about the fighter vocation as well as what you're currently running. Don't forget to check out our website for gaming news, entertainment, and more. The link to that as well as all our other links are in the description below. Thanks again, and I'll see you all in the next one.